He was just trying to catch a flight. A simple trip, nothing unusual, until a uniformed officer locked eyes on him. In seconds, what should have been a normal airport routine turned into a nightmare of suspicion, humiliation, and fear. He hadn't broken a law, hadn't caused a scene, yet he became a target. Cameras were everywhere, passengers were watching, but no one stepped in. What happened next would not only expose one man's abuse of power, it would shock an entire nation. It was supposed to be an exciting day. Marcus, a young professional in his early 30s, had spent weeks preparing for a business trip that could change his career. He arrived at the airport early, dressed neatly, suitcase in hand, boarding pass tucked in his pocket. The terminal buzzed with the usual chaos, families rushing to gates, travelers sipping coffee, announcements echoing over the loudspeakers. For Marcus, it was just another step in his journey. He moved through the crowd with ease, checking his phone, mentally rehearsing the presentation he'd give once he landed. To anyone watching, he was no different from the hundreds of passengers around him, focused, calm, ready to travel. Yet, beneath the surface of what felt like an ordinary morning, something was about to shift. Across the terminal, an officer's eyes lingered on him, not on the loud group of students blocking the walkway, not on the man struggling with an oversized bag, but on Marcus, quiet, composed, simply walking to his gate. He didn't notice at first. He couldn't have known that those few seconds of unwanted attention would change everything. As he approached the security line, adjusting his jacket, and pulling out his ID, Marcus had no reason to think twice. He was confident, respectful, and had nothing to hide. But the officer watching him saw only what he wanted to see. And in that moment, Marcus's trip stopped being about work. It became about survival. Marcus placed his bag on the conveyor belt and stepped forward like everyone else. He handed over his boarding pass with a polite nod, ready to move through security. But before he could take another step, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Sir, step aside." The officer who had been watching him was now at his shoulder, his presence heavy and commanding. Marcus froze for a moment, confused. He glanced around, half expecting to see someone else being addressed. But no, the officer's eyes were locked on him alone. Passengers in line shifted uncomfortably, whispering to one another as Marcus was pulled aside. His heart raced. He hadn't done anything wrong. Why him? Why now? He forced a calm expression, but inside, unease grew like a knot in his chest. The officer began asking rapid-fire questions. "Where are you traveling? Why are you here? Who are you meeting?" Marcus answered politely, each word measured, trying to keep his voice steady. But it didn't matter. The officer's tone carried an edge of suspicion, as if the answers had been decided before the questions were even asked. His bag was pulled from the belt. Zippers opened. Contents dumped out for everyone to see. Shirts, toiletries, his laptop, all treated like contraband. A mother held her child closer. A businessman craned his neck to watch. Strangers' eyes burned into him, their silence heavy with judgment. Marcus could feel himself shrinking under the weight of their stares. He thought about speaking up, about asking why he was being singled out. But one look at the officer's tightened jaw told him the truth. Any protest could be twisted. Any word could become a weapon against him. He knew too well how quickly situations like this could spiral. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours. The officer inspected every inch of Marcus's belongings, running gloved hands across his clothes, flipping through his papers, scrolling through his phone as if searching for proof of a crime that didn't exist. Still, Nothing. There was nothing to find. And yet, the officer's suspicion didn't fade. Instead, it deepened. He ordered Marcus to step farther aside, away from the crowd, as if he were some kind of threat. The whispers grew louder. Phones discreetly appeared in trembling hands, cameras quietly recording. Marcus's throat tightened. He wasn't just being questioned now. He was being put on display. For Marcus, the humiliation was unbearable. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a public trial without evidence, a punishment without crime. And the worst part was knowing why. He wasn't naive. He saw it in the officer's eyes, in the way the man's gaze lingered not on his bag, but on his skin. He wanted to believe it would end soon, that logic, fairness, and common sense would prevail. But as the officer reached for his handcuffs, Marcus realized this was only the beginning. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked open, the sound slicing through the terminal noise. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the officer grabbed Marcus's wrist. For a split second, Marcus considered resisting, pulling his arm back. But the thought vanished as quickly as it came. He knew the risk. One wrong move, and this could end far worse than humiliation. "Hands behind your back," the officer barked. Marcus's chest tightened. His pulse hammered in his ears. He stood frozen, every muscle screaming with tension, as strangers' phones rose higher, recording every second. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't lifted a hand, hadn't done a single thing to deserve this. But here he was, treated like a criminal in front of hundreds. The officer yanked his arm, forcing it behind him. Marcus winced at the pressure, his knees nearly buckling. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman called out, "Why are you arresting him? He didn't do anything." Another voice shouted, "This is wrong!" But still, no one stepped forward. No one dared challenge the badge. As the second cuff snapped shut, Marcus felt the final weight of power pressing down on him. His mind spun with fear. Would this end in a holding cell? Would it escalate further? He thought of stories he'd read, names that became hashtags, lives that ended too soon. For a terrifying moment, he wondered if his name might be next. But then, the shift came. A man in a suit, a federal officer from airport security, pushed through the crowd. His voice was sharp, demanding. "What's going on here?" The racist cop stiffened but didn't release his grip. "Suspicious passenger," he muttered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Cameras zoomed in, recording every word, every movement. And suddenly, the balance of power began to tilt. The airport security officer demanded proof. "Show me what you found. What crime has he committed?" His words cut through the tension like a blade. The racist cop hesitated, fumbling for an explanation, but there was none. Marcus's belongings lay scattered across the table. Just clothes, a laptop, papers for his business trip. Nothing more. Passengers murmured louder, some shaking their heads in disgust. The scene had shifted. What began as humiliation for one man was now exposing the abuse of another. The officer's face flushed red as he realized the cameras were still rolling, dozens of lenses capturing every second of his baseless accusation. With no evidence, no justification, and pressure mounting. From both the crowd and his superior, the cop reluctantly unlocked the cuffs. The metal clicked open, and Marcus's hands dropped free. He rubbed his wrists, the faint marks stinging far less than the humiliation etched into his memory. He wanted to speak, to shout, to demand an apology. But the weight of the moment left him silent. The federal officer turned to Marcus and said firmly, "You're free to go, sir. I'm sorry this happened, but An apology from one man couldn't erase the truth that had just unfolded before hundreds of witnesses. Marcus collected his belongings with quiet dignity. As he walked toward his gate, whispers followed, not about guilt, but about injustice. He had been seen. The world had seen. Later, videos of the incident would flood social media, sparking outrage and conversation across the nation. For Marcus, it was a painful reminder of what it means to be judged not by your actions, but by your skin. For everyone watching, it was a question that lingered long after the planes departed. How many more times will this story repeat before the world finally demands change? If this story moved you, don't let it fade when the video ends. Share it, talk about it, and keep the conversation alive, because silence only protects the problem. Stories like Marcus's aren't rare, and every voice raised against injustice matters. What would you have done if you were there at that airport? Would you have spoken up or stayed silent? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like this, hit the like button and subscribe for more powerful, eye-opening stories. Because change doesn't start with headlines, it starts with us.